If you visit our office in Bangalore, you would see a huge poster on a wall which basically says, nothing is someone else's problem. It's a quote by the founder of Combinator. We are very impressed on how that value has worked out. We are super inspired by that statement.
Patrizia Bertini, a DesignOps leader, made a very interesting statement that efficient teams do not happen, they are designed. And that's what DesignOps is all about. Another way to put it is you have to find canvases for other people to paint on. This is borrowed from Ryan Holiday, what he calls the canvas strategy. It's about finding direction towards someone and helping someone who knows where they are headed, but you help them pack, freeing up their time so they can focus on their strengths. These are some interesting definitions of DesignOps I've found. So Chetty, we have you today, and my first question to you is, what is DesignOps to you?
I think the first statement that you've said, right, I think that very summarizes everything kind of neatly. You generally hear that in DesignOps, I'm guessing design system or just program managing design, right? For me, anything and everything that basically helps designers as well as design teams do their fundamental job of designing correctly or efficiently is DesignOps for us, right? Now, something as close to the design craft as, let's say, a design system also a part of it. Something which is completely away from the design craft, like hiring designers or doing a retro of how the team structure has helped us in reaching a certain business goal the last quarter and how should we revamp it the next quarter. Even that comes as a part of DesignOps, right? But the thing is, we don't often see dedicated DesignOps leaders as such. I haven't seen any in Indian ecosystem. I could be wrong though. But what I've definitely seen is every designer or every design leader or even product leaders for that matter that I've encountered, they voluntarily or involuntarily focus on these things. It's been happening subconsciously throughout. It's just that in the recent times, this function kind of came out and a label has been put on it.
Got it. I think very recurring answer so far. You've been probably doing DesignOps, you just don't know it or you're not labeling. Yeah. We started off this session with Wolfram in Gojek, a DesignOps leader. We spoke about how it's more or less like a servant leadership where you're working for your team to succeed. Nielson Norman's talk about 5 structures of DesignOps. There's scattered, where DesignOps is taken care of by other roles. Then you have solitary design structure, where DesignOps is one person. Then you've got specialized DesignOps structures, where DesignOps is divided across a few people who manage or oversee specific aspects. Then you've got a distributed DesignOps structure, where these roles are distributed and dedicated to individual teams throughout the organization, focusing on team-to-team collaboration. And then finally, we have an elevated DesignOps structure where it's a separate entity and a department altogether, providing centralized resources and programs that affect and benefit the entire organization. The reason I am talking about this is, Chetty, you've been at Razorpay since the start. You've gone and seen the design team evolve from 0 to 1, 1 to 10, and now even 10 to 100. Can you paint a picture on how the early days were at Razorpay, how it has evolved to what it is now, and the evolution of the design structures and the design ops structures while you were there?
Yeah, a lot to unpack is Razorpay was started a good 8 years ago. In fact, we just celebrated our 8th year anniversary last week. When the team started, there were 8 folks and a couple of designers were actually the starting designers. And today, if you were to ask me the count, I don't have it on my fingers, but it should be somewhere over 80 plus people. Across product design, across graphic design, which we call as communication design. There's a UX writing function altogether, which we call as content design. And we have a dedicated UX research team as well. So one designer who was basically doing everything under the sun over this course of 8 years has transitioned into a huge team with multiple sub-functions and multiple business units also. If you go deeper into Razorpay, we are not just one particular product. We are actually 4 different business units put together, barring all the acquisitions that we've done. So one huge team handles all the payment stack. Their responsibility is to figure out how do businesses in India accept payments, as simple as that. The second business unit is the banking system that we've built. We call it Razorpay X. Their problem statement is again completely different. How do businesses bank online? How do they store money? How do they move money from point A to point B, etc.? How do they pay salaries? How do they pay taxes to the government? The third business unit is capital. That's our lending unit. Again, their problem statement is completely different. They are in a completely different level altogether. Like if you were to talk about 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1000, each of these business units are in a different zone altogether as of today. The fourth is Razorpay platform, which builds all the services for the rest of the functions. How we are built as of today is basically we have 4 different set of design orgs altogether. I'll not call them design teams. I'll call them design orgs. So there is a payments design org, there is a banking design org, there's a capital design org, etc. It took us a lot of time as well as trial and error to kind of reach this decentralized structure because we've primarily focused on customer journeys right from the starting. We never focused on, hey, let's have a centralized design unit and let's have all UX designers sitting in one roof, all UI designers under one place, all graphic designers under one place. We never went that way primarily because we wanted design to be far more integrated. Naturally, that problem statement basically came down to us having product teams where every team was focusing on one particular user journey. For example, sign up to KYC completion is one journey. So you would see a bunch of product managers, a bunch of designers, a bunch of marketeers, a bunch of sales folks, operational folks, customer success folks, etc., acting as one particular pod so that everyone at any given point of time, they're focusing on one particular problem statement. And there's the right level of collaboration, coordination among all these stakeholders. And that has worked brilliantly for us, where I don't think we ever went back from being a decentralized unit to something like a centralized or a centralized embedded unit. It has basically helped us in integrating design far more deeper with the other stakeholders. Now, coming to design ops in this entire structure, it was always a distributed model where every designer, again, I'm not calling a design leader because by default, design leaders have design ops as a part of their charter. But what we've done at Razorpay is anyone who's enthusiastic in taking up design ops as an activity, we were happy and we encouraged them to. To give a very simple example, right? When everyone wanted to move from Sketch to Figma, that was again a part of design ops itself. It was a new tool that had to be figured out, that had to be embedded into the process that we already had. In fact, no design leader took part in it because a couple of designers who were pretty enthusiastic to take that up took that entire responsibility on their shoulder and finished the job, right? So throughout the last 8 years, we've always had multiple designers, multiple design enthusiasts, and design leaders parallelly kind of taking up a very distributed model of design ops, where one person was focusing on hiring, one was focusing on external evangelization so that we market ourselves out there as one of the best design teams in India so that we are good at hiring. One person naturally took up something like standardizing the design system. One person took up, can we do all retros to make sure that we structured in the right way? One person took over all the design review processes. Do we have the right forums where we are showcasing designs? Do we have the right forums where we are taking feedback? One person naturally took up the design HR responsibilities. How should we give feedback to designers? What should be the learning and development programs catered towards designers? What should be the growth path for designers, fundamentally speaking? Right? Why should a senior product designer come after a product designer? Or why should or should not there be like a senior design manager? All of these things are also a part of design ops, and I don't see an immediate need for us to have like a solitary design ops person, or even to that matter, an elevator. I got very far from that. But yeah, I definitely see that our distributed model has definitely shown results. And by default, design ops being a charter on every design leader in the organization, it by default has like a voluntary action towards it. It's not like involuntarily it's been happening like this, forget it, right? So that way we've been pretty lucky with a lot of design leaders joining us early on, a lot of design leaders kind of shaping up, from the team itself, and they've naturally picked this up. So that worked out great for us.
Fantastic. Thanks for answering this with so much depth. I have 2 follow-up questions there. So when you're in that first year, right, what kind of vision do you need to have? Or rather, a better question is, what kind of vision did you have for this entire design function? Did you folks take some fundamental decisions and align your leadership right in the start? Or was it a lot of taking it by the ear?
Oh, I would have loved to have some design principles or tenets defined back then. Some Bible of sorts that we can go back to often and say that we are taking this particular decision because we believe in this particular tenet or we've defined this particular tenet. But that didn't happen. I don't think we've done that. Having said that, the fundamental culture values of Razorpay basically came into the picture for any sort of decision. I'll give a couple of examples, a couple of values from Razorpay which we follow very closely. One big thing is always be customer first. Whenever you're faced with a situation where you need to take a particular decision, where Razorpay gets impacted, people of Razorpay, the employees of Razorpay get impacted, and the customers of Razorpay get impacted. The default logic that you need to use is customers over Razorpay over employees of Razorpay. This logic by default helped us in taking a lot of decisions. And another big value that we fundamentally followed, and even today we closely follow, is being super autonomous and taking the highest level of ownership. If you visit our office in Bangalore, you would see a huge poster on a wall which basically says, "Nothing is someone else's problem." It's a quote by the founder of Moderator. We are very impressed on how that value has worked out. We are super inspired by that statement. This has led, early in the days, even without a neat structure or defined design process where you have a document defining a bullet point list of this is step 1 for a designer, step 2 for a designer, this is the feedback process, etc. Even without having all of that documented, thanks to the cultural values that we've had, everyone across the team, be it designers, PMs, or engineers, were by default doing everything for the customers by taking the highest amount of ownership that they can, right? Where you would see that designers were stepping out of their comfort zones, doing some level of product management, some level of marketing. There were times when we responded to customer support tickets on a frequent basis. Every Friday, we used to sit and we used to actually respond to customer support tickets, right? So practices like these have always helped us in making sure that we're doing the right things right from the early stages, even without having design tenets or design principles documented, even without having all these feedback points, even without having a dedicated design ops person overseeing how should the design team function. That way, I'd give all the credit to the values that we've defined right from the early stages, and not just for design. I'd say that to every single function in Razorpay.
Brilliant. I think the takeaway here is that while you did not have something carved out specifically for design, there was this binding ethos or values for Razorpay. The whole Y Combinator, acceleration, and support really brings that culture, and Razorpay being one of the earlier, if not the first one in that cohort. I wanted to throw some light on some interesting stats I came across, which is a good segue to my next question. So, Design Assembly did earlier this year only did a bunch of surveys. They surveyed like hundreds of people from dozens of countries and reported that half of DesignOps teams are smaller than 4 people. More than 80% of them are smaller than 10 people. Most of the DesignOps team were barely 2.5 years old. And they concluded that DesignOps teams are very small. They're pretty young, but they're very mighty because they've been given a lot of responsibility. And I'm not necessarily talking about a separate carved out department, right? In the fashion you spoke, it's a role, it's a distributed role within multiple people. Now, you've been in Razorpay for 8 years. I just said how young DesignOps has generally been. So you were at the forefront of DesignOps almost a decade ago. Now, you went from being a product designer to a lead, to a manager, and now you're the director of design. When it comes to the evolution of DesignOps and evolution of yourself, I had a question about frameworks, right? Was there any framework you used to scale from one to many? How did you really decide who executes? To what extent do I look at DesignOps? Who do I make a leader when generally leadership is a big problem in the design industry? Because the whole UX and product design field has been very nascent. Any frameworks you've used to scale the team and really delegate and decide who do I upscale, where do I hire externally, and so on?
Oh, I don't think there's any particular framework of such. I don't think there's any playbook that you can follow which can say that after a certain scale, be it like the product scale or the people scale, let's consider after you scale up to more than 15 designers, you would need to have this structure or whatever. Now that I think of it, I think it all happened naturally at Razorpay. A small history about my profile as well. I'm not a design educated person. I haven't studied design. I stumbled upon it and I kind of picked it up along with Harshil and Shashank when we started Razorpay. So most of the things I was learning on the job. And I was picking off things from companies outside Razorpay. Whoever I could meet. Let's say seniors from college or seniors that Harshil and Shashank know, or the entire YC batch that we had, right? So it was just around how are they structured, what help, and what can we take over from them. Right? So it all happened naturally only for us. And one thing to note here was the evolution of the design team. I can closely draw parallels to the evolution of the product that Razorpay had, or the number of product lines or the number of business units that we had. To give an example, till 2018 December, we were an embedded team or the early decentralized team where there were owners defined. Journey A to B, this particular person is responsible. Journey B to C, a couple of designers are responsible, etc. 2018 is when we entered this entire era of banking as well as lending for businesses in India. And overall, the entire org was also started, we kind of focused on these three problems in parallel. Like payments was a completely different business unit. Banking was a different problem statement altogether. So was lending. So that basically left the design team to take a call as to how can we cater to these business problem statements. Should we still be in a embedded system where one person is probably, depending on their bandwidth, taking up both payments and banking in one shot? Probably a couple of people are taking both capital, the lending unit and banking unit in one shot. So these questions came up back then and it didn't make sense for us. We again went back to how can the design team be a lot more customer first? How can we, if this is a particular long-term business goal that we have, how can we be there right at the forefront? That basically meant that we also had to be super decentralized, where there is a dedicated org or a dedicated design team for every single product problem statement. That meant that complete autonomy to that team to go hire, whatever design function they want. For example, let's say if the banking team came back and said that we want a dedicated user research team, it's up to that team. If the lending team said that we wanted a dedicated design ops team, fair, up to that team. It's fully autonomous to kind of take those calls, right? So I can definitely draw a parallel to how we evolved, to how the business units and the product lines evolved. Having said that, coming to the question of how did we decide who gets to lead or who's going to lead, right? Even that naturally happened where we believe that Razorpay grows only if employees at Razorpay grow, and that growth can be in any particular terms. For example, I grew from a product designer to a design leader as of today inside Razorpay. And that happened because Razorpay believed in me. The fundamental belief that if Chetty grows as a design leader, the design team grows, and in turn the product grows, and in turn Razorpay will grow, right? So we believe that. So we built leaders from the team itself early on, where we've identified a few people who've shown that potential, who are naturally good at leading people, who are naturally good at handling the soft functionalities as well. And we've kind of given them that opportunity, and almost every single person aced that role, where a bunch of design leaders in the organization as of today are actually freshers that we hired 4 or 5 years ago. That is one shot where we were growing leaders in the organization. And because they already had the entire context of why did Razorpay start banking, or why did Razorpay start banking at a particular time in this particular way, it was easy for them to take on that hat and lead the team. But again, we also had a lot of really good lateral design leaders join the organization, hired some really good leaders out there who've been there, done that, who've seen startups growing from 0 to 1 to 10, who've already worked at large organizations where design teams of more than 50 people working under one roof, right? These lateral leaders as well as the in-grown leaders, they were responsible in fundamentally shaping up to where we are today. All the practices that we have, right, from what's the competency framework for designers, to how do we review designs, to what are the practices on something as simple as on Figma, to how should we enable the design system? How should we work with engineers? How should we take up a project which is a lot more critical? How should we take up a project which is a lot more experimental? All of this has actually stemmed from these leaders and designers who are super enthusiastic in taking up those jobs. So over time, we've evolved naturally. There were definitely failures for sure. There were good enough wins and losses in the way we were structured and all of it. But overall, again, touch wood, I think we took the right calls at the right time. And a huge part of the credit goes to the design leaders that we have. And a huge part of the credit also goes to the product engineering and those that we have at Razorpay, because they've been there, done that with other teams, and you can definitely learn a lot from that. For example, we used to sit with the marketing leaders just to understand how did they scale up their team, where there are content writers, there are social media managers, there's the P&M function, etc. Right? Similarly, design has multiple functions. So the moment we started looking at other teams, the moment we started looking at teams outside Razorpay, also that also helped.
Brilliant. I've seen very few companies really have their designers who they've hired like several years ago grow along and then you promote them into leadership positions, because as a recruitment platform, we've often heard that now it's time for me to hire an external design leader. And while you've done that, I've personally seen and I know a few folks in Razorpay as to how you also grown with the organization. So I think that's a very unique thing about Razorpay. I wanted to ask you, so how is the structure decided in terms of hierarchy? And the reason I ask you is a lot of people are curious and sometimes confused, and they are given a mandate, be it a founder, a product manager, a CTO, or sometimes a design leader, saying, how do I really go about this? So let's say you've distributed your teams based on the different product features, offerings, and lines. How does the Razorpay hierarchy go? Who's the leader of that pond and how does it go down?
So couple of attributes kind of come to my mind. One thing is, in a particular customer journey, how complex is that and how deep does Razorpay want to go in that? Out of the hundreds of product lines that we have, there are a bunch of them which we want to double down. There are a bunch of them which we want to do a lot more experimentation around. And there are a bunch of them which we want to shut down also. And there are a bunch of them which we just want to maintain. So depending on the complexity and depending on how deep do we want to invest, this is one attribute to kind of figure out, does this particular charter need a bunch of design leaders or what level of a leader? Is a design manager good enough? Or do we need like a associate director or a design director or someone even higher? This attribute kind of helps out. Another attribute from a people side which always kind of helped out is the ratio as to how many people are reporting into one person for the maximum efficiency. Right? For example, a manager can definitely have 50 people reporting into her. And on the other hand, you can have a manager with only 5 reports also. Over time, we've understood, again, both from internal teams who've already set up and also from external teams whom we've researched with, we understood that the magical number is somewhere around 6 to 7, where one particular leader has not more than 6 to 7 reports, so that the manager also has the right face time with their reports and the reports get the right level of, be it hand-holding or guidance or whatever you call it, right? So these two attributes have always helped us in figuring out the hierarchy. Again, hierarchy has a very negative connotation around it. But at a scale of 3,000 plus people with a design team of 80 plus people, it is required to make sure things run in the most oiled fashion as possible. Right? Coming to, again, not a playbook of sorts, but I'll try to paint a picture. If you were to take the payments organization itself, which is primarily responsible for figuring out how do businesses in India accept payments? A big part of it is how do businesses sign up with Razorpay and fill the KYC, get approved. Another big part is us monitoring if they're doing any fraud. Another big part is how do the end consumers paying on these businesses, right? What payment methods are they using? Are they using UPI? Are they using credit cards? If they're using credit cards, are they using the same credit cards that they used last time? Do we need to save that credit card? Any analytics that we need to give on top of that? Any other extra feature that we need to give on top of that? And for all of this to function, we need to have a fundamental base payment layer which functions with the banks so that everything functions smoothly, right? So overall payments as an organization, in my opinion, needs one design leader. Now, what designation do you give that leader is something that's a little internal. You can have a senior design manager, you can have a design director, you can have a design head or a chief design officer for payments. Like any fancy name that you can give, right? Basically, any person or any designation out there, any seniority level, which can handle these multiple spokes that I've spoke about. This is on one hand, how do they sign up, basically the entire marketing, how do they do their KYC, how do end consumers pay, B2, B2C side of it, like all of these things, right? Like any person who can handle all of these complexities under one charter, whatever the designation may be, we need one person for that, right? Under that person, depending on where are we investing the most, is where divisions happen, right? Let's consider for the next quarter or so, if you're heavily focusing on growth, where I want the designers to madly focus on getting as many signups as possible, getting as many KYCs verified as possible, I'll probably put way more designers over there, which leads to putting not just one design leader, a couple of design leaders probably. Similarly, UX writing as a function, does it require one UX writing head? Or probably the design managers themselves can take care of 3 product designers, 1 creative designer, and 1 UX writer. These calls are completely separate, where you're not just going on seniority here for the hierarchy, you're also going against the functions. Right? One very peculiar thing that you would notice about Razorpay, the graphic designers, the communication designers, the entire function, which is super important, is not a part of the marketing team. It's a part of the fundamental design team. They report into the designers. They report into one design head of sorts or one design leader of sorts. Generally out there, you would see communication designers or graphic designers working directly with the marketing team. I'm not saying that is wrong or this is correct. It's that this is something that is peculiar, a conscious call that we do. So coming back to the hierarchy itself, I don't think there's a particular playbook. We go back to how difficult is a problem statement and how many people are reporting into one particular leader. And can that particular leader take a charter under them in the right ways, where they are not just maintaining that charter, but actually in the status quo in that entire charter throughout. Painting a super fairy tale picture over here, but the ground reality is again, hiring these design leaders and hiring the right set of designers for these functions and constantly making sure you have the right structures to meet those goals is a big task. A story for another day. But these hierarchies, these structures, and how are these designers collaborating with each other and the other stakeholders is a super important problem statement. I wouldn't say that we've cracked the code, but whatever we've been doing till now has been working fine for us. What we ought to do a lot more often is, do a lot more retrospects to kind of understand, okay, fair, the last year's structure, did it help or not? But overall, I don't see it changing anytime soon because I see designers growing very well. I see the product growing very well in the structure. I see new functions getting added seamlessly in the structure also. Like last year, we added a dedicated content design function to this entire team. And within a few weeks, it got seamlessly integrated without changing much of the hierarchy. That gives me confidence that we are on the right path, and I don't see a huge change for this hierarchy.
Got it. I think you're being very modest there. I believe there's something Razorpay is doing which is really working well. I have seen a lot of companies hire a strong set of first few designers, and then you reach a certain threshold where you have to start doing non-design work, right? Where you're not doing screens and UI and UX, and you have to look at hiring, career development, metrics, analysis, etc. And that's where sometimes it breaks. But it's fantastic to see that somehow, I don't know if it's luck or maybe there's just something about Razorpay where that initial team really, killed it across all fronts.
I think again over there we always focused on design and non-design work for every designer. We try to gamify the system so that designers also take part in non-design activities, like let's say hiring for that example, right? Or external evangelization. All of these things we try to create clubs around it, saying that hey, this particular club is called a design social club. They do external evangelization. They write blogs. They're active on Instagram and Twitter, etc. This is called a hiring club. We kind of made sure that every designer, irrespective of what they do, what seniority they are at, have their core design, their core craft as their full-time job, as well as they're contributing in building the team, which is following these clubs or being a part of those clubs or creating a new club of sorts. So that way, I think every designer took part in it. It was not dedicated to just one solitary person who was responsible for hiring. That could have been a nightmare for us. I don't think that would have scaled up for us.
Fantastic. Just exposing people to those things, I think, makes a big difference, right? I love what you said in the start. There's nothing which is just one person's problem. I had the pleasure of working with a lot of like CMOs and marketing heads, as well as heads of products and design. And more often than you'd think, I always see, especially in product design, a lot of managers talking to me, and I'm going through the website with them. And I'm like, oh, what's that? Maybe it's a banner, maybe it's something the marketing team has designed. And they literally, I can see their eyes roll all the way back, saying, that's not my team's job. The flip side is when I speak to marketing folks, being very candid, the kind of responses I get is that marketing has to think daily. You have to look at a lot of awareness creation. While product design is usually not daily, they look at it in batches and sprints and cohorts, and there's a method to it. While in marketing, chaos is the method. And that's why there's a linking issue very often. So when I hear you say that it's one team, marketing designer, product designers are one team, what was the logic behind it? And how did you convince the marketing folks that this is the right way? And while we are at it, what are the cons? What are the disadvantages?
Yeah. There's no right answer to which is the right structure in setting up your graphic design team. Basically, designers who are responsible for marketing your product or branding your company. The reason why we took that call early on was to make sure that anything and everything that is going out of Razorpay, especially when it comes to design and experience, is under one roof, one person or one team or one leader or whatever you call it. Coming to how did we convince the marketing team on that? Again, trust me on it. I can go through my journal. I can see multiple wars that have happened between the two teams where we are fighting on who should take ownership of what, or how should the team be structured? Should there be dedicated people for dedicated product marketing managers so that they have their own individual designer working along with them, etc. Like bandwidth issues, and should they be working in a sprint model where everything is a week or a 2 week timeline, or should they be working in a super chaotic model, like you said, where everything is an experiment and everything is required yesterday, right? Multiple battles for sure, and all in good terms again, right? We always went back to the primary reason as to why we were structured in so and so way, is to maintain that design quality. Again, not saying that if we structure the communication design team under marketing, the quality might drop. It's just that the shared understanding of design values or what does design stand for Razorpay would have come out a lot better if anything and everything design is under one roof. So with the right marketing leaders, it was kind of easier to sit with them and explain them and also understand their problem of what's happening if, let's say, with the communication design team is with the larger design team. Like, what problems are they facing? Primarily speaking, it all goes back to bandwidth. And it all goes back to timelines. Like, I wanted this particular ad to go out or this banner to go out. When I reached to a designer, the designer went back to the usual process of a particular sprint, and the timeline was given, which is 2 weeks from now. While this is a very tiny thing, I wanted immediately, right? Once we solved for those bandwidth challenges and those timeline challenges, we stopped getting those queries. Hey, can I have a design team under me? Can I have the communication designers sitting next to me working with me? How we solved those bandwidth challenges and these timeline challenges was again another case study in itself, where we made a list of all the things that communication designers were responsible for, which required creative thought and which didn't require anything. Where things were done, templates were there, and you just had to do something. We had a lot of wins and failures over there. For example, a failure that I can quote here is we tried to teach marketing folks how to use a particular design tool. That didn't work out. A win over here is we identified all the not so creative jobs, which were pretty robotic in nature. Again, there's no avoiding such robotic jobs. Take any startup, any function, there's enough robotic job, right? Somebody has to do it. So what we did is we created enough templates and enough documentation around it, and we hired an external agency. We gave these guidelines and said that you work with our marketing team. And for the first few months, a dedicated designer from the OG design team will review how the work is done. And if the work is done pretty good, we'll hand off. Unless there's an escalation, we'll not really care about how this not so creative job is being done. We've done such fixes and plugs here and there to make sure that their problems were answered. But we fundamentally stuck to having the entire graphic design team, the entire marketing design team, be it brand, be it the product marketing design team who are responsible for marketing these products, the team which works on ad campaigns and marketing campaigns and social campaigns, etc. We were able to host this entire function under just one design org. And that logic worked out great for us. I'm very happy that we've done that. I see the marketing designers and the other designers collaborating far more frequently, experimenting far more frequently, doing a lot more things far more frequently than otherwise would have happened. So that knowledge transfer happens a lot more. And marketing designers were super happy being a part of a larger design org than being part of a marketing team, right? We were seeing designers grow by leaps and bounds because we've seen a bunch of marketing designers at Razorpay have picked up product design, have picked up UX research, and have moved their functions. I'm not saying that these things would not have happened otherwise. It was a lot more easier this way. I'm glad that we took that decision. And again, back to the original question of hierarchy, I don't think this will change either in the coming 2 to 3 years.
This is brilliant. Just this excerpt is a good playbook to let a lot of design leaders pitch to their organizations. And it definitely works here, according to me, because you'll always have core and chore work to do. The interiors of your house when you buy it, but you have to wash dishes every day. That's the way it happens. It's the number of times I get a brief saying, I want something like Razorpay's landing page, or Razorpay's design theme chahiye. It's very, very common. It's almost every month I get 1-2 brands putting this in their brief.
Glad to hear.
Of course. There's definitely something which is working for you, and that homogeneity, the kind of quality, consistent quality across all design touchpoints really speaks for itself. I'm not going to name, but there are so many big companies today with really good design, product design teams. When you look at their marketing, things like their banners, gift cards, etc., it's completely different altogether. And obviously, I have a trained, you'll have a much better trained, and you'll identify these things. So arguably, it doesn't have that much of an impact. But for the ones who know, they can see through it. And I think the audiences are becoming smarter and more mature. I definitely see this is a big problem.
But again, right, the interesting point over here is again, there's no right structure here. For example, for us, it worked out because what we were marketing was basically the product. We were not marketing a particular physical good of sorts. Let's consider a B2C company out there who's into e-commerce. I am not sure what call I would have taken if I was a design leader over there. But again, for our product and for our use case, this setup worked out best, where every design function is under one design org. That worked out. So I'd like to give that credit to the product also over here, the use case over here. If this was a completely different structure altogether where we were on a different product line, I am not sure what would have worked out.
No, of course, I'm glad you gave that disclaimer. And even a disclaimer from my end is that I'm referring to companies which are product-led. Because if you look at, let's say, D2C company, marketing is a fundamental function which decides your CAC, LTV. While often, obviously, it's important to have acquisition solved for fintech SaaS companies. But product-led growth comes from retention, engagement, and a lot of things you do to resurrect your users through design, through the flows you create, through the small push notifications you send. Once you already acquired, it really comes down to measuring it and seeing what's really working. That brings me to my next question, Chetty. We spoke about moving from Sketch to Figma, a classic design ops problem actually.
Yeah.
But then there's also making somebody responsible for someone, deciding sometimes budgets, what workflows we need to keep, what Slack channel should we have, and how best we can maintain those aspects. So a lot of experimentation has to happen, of course. But I wanted to know, how do experiments happen at Razorpay, and perhaps more focused on design operations, like not when it comes to the product and the user flows. Is it test and learn experiment? Is it like proof of concepts? And obviously, how do you benchmark those experiments?
There is no certain label that we put saying that, oh, let's experiment with this particular structure or a new tool or a new process of sorts. It's just that someone might come up with a new thing up there. Could be a tool, could be a process, could be a structure or whatever. Could be a new way or a new Slack channel where we are sharing feedback. Or a new process where your status change on Asana is piping it directly to Slack and the leaders get notified and they're giving some feedback or whatever, right? Like, there is no set standard that we're going to experiment this next sprint and see how it works, or we're going to experiment this next quarter and see how it works. As I said earlier, right? Like, nothing is someone else's problem. We see something wrong, we go fix it. So whatever processes and practices that we have as of today, most of them were organically picked up. For example, a design manager in the payments team is picking up a new process which helps their designers to be a lot more closer to customers. In fact, this actually happened. Right? One of the design managers, they went ahead and tried to deal with one of our sales managers, saying that any customer conversation you're doing, take permission from the customer if you can record it, and put it on this drive folder. And for every 10 recordings that you want to put, I'm going to take you out for a coffee, or I'm going to take you out for a beer, right? And every Friday, this manager made the rest of the designers in the team to just bluntly sit and listen to those customer conversations, right? Because this person noticed that designers in her team are not so open in striking a conversation with a stranger out there. So to kind of ease in that process and to help user research, a very passive practice was put up. A small activity that was given to these designers was listen to those conversations, take up an Asana board or an Excel sheet, and start writing ideas or things that you would improve basis that conversation. If somebody says that, hey, this particular thing or the sign up is confusing, go through that sentence and see what would you write otherwise, right? In a month's time, we had an Excel sheet with over 200 line items of improvements that we could do. And a product manager and an engineer got hands on that sheet. From the next sprint onwards, I was seeing every line item getting ticked off, which is going live. And I've seen other design managers casually catching up with this person and implementing that practice in their teams. Organically, people pick up things. Some things work out, some do not. So that way you would see a bunch of Slack channels which we created for a certain process, which are just graveyards as of today, not working as much. Or somebody figured out a better process out there, right? Like where we believe in challenging the status quo, where we are like, you know what, this particular process has been there right from the starting. Should we challenge it or not? The answer is always yes. So that way, organically, we picked up a lot of processes. Some definitely worked out, or some did not. One thing that I regret as a team not doing is documenting these things or documenting these processes. For example, the design manager who's figured out these sales conversations and the recordings, if let's say a small case study could have been done inside the team and showcased it to the rest of the design managers and leaders that we have, probably everyone would have picked it up a little more sooner than later, right? So those regrets are there, but overall, I think the answer is organically we picked up a lot of things.
Fair enough. Maybe I have a more focused experimentation question, which is when you're going from 1 to 10, you identify somebody who's already in the team and promote them. So that's essentially an experiment in the start. Can you tell a little bit more about how do you prep yourself that, hey, I need to hire some person for this role? How do I go about benchmarking? Is this the right person? And once you make that decision, how do you benchmark them, test them, and experiment with them?
Yeah. So on this, I think we've done a fairly good job on defining the competency framework. So every designer, be it the product design function or the UX research function or the content design function or the communication design function, their levels defined very clearly. What we call a product designer 1 or product designer 2. How do you go from that to a senior? How do you go from that to a lead? At a lead, how do you split from a manager to an individual contribution role? So we've very clear defined levels. And not just that, under every level, we've also defined the roles and responsibilities. For example, what is the level of product and business understanding that a fresher designer would have compared to a seasoned design leader? In practice, what are the communication styles that are expected of a 1-year-old designer to, let's say, someone at a design director or someone even on top of that, right? So with these very clearly defined, they help us both on hiring as well as our appraisals and performance feedback. So a personal practice is always go back to the reports, basically sit with them and say, for example, if I was working with you, you would see me coming to you often with a competency sheet saying that, hey, Kavan, you're at a design manager level as of today. Here are the things that you do absolutely well. Here are the things that you need to do better for you to go into a senior manager or whatever, right? And you do your self-assessment as well, because all of this is public. At any point during the day, during the year, Kavan can definitely go back to that sheet, do a self-assessment, come back and say that, hey, this is a particular thing that I have issues with growing into a senior level. How can I do this? So this dialogue constantly happens. So that helps us in making sure that the promotions that we do, the level ups that we do are standardized across. Again, when I say across, I don't just mean one design team versus another design team. It is also a designer versus a PM versus an engineer versus someone else, right? For example, the expectation on a design manager is to sit with a product lead and figure out the entire quarter roadmap, right? So over there, this person has to be at a level where he or she can debate with that PM lead. And that PM lead should also be at a level where they can debate and question back on designs by this design lead, right? So that way, competency frameworks across Razorpay are very clearly defined, and they're public. Where you are and what you need to do to reach the next level, and they're used for hiring also. Because mistakes at this level, at people level, are very risky mistakes. Having a design leader who might not be a great fit for your team, not a great situation to be in, both during hiring and post exit also. Right? It's a lot of chaos that needs to be handled. So we rather take another extra couple of months to make sure we hire the right person than just immediately filling in a particular gap, right? So on that front, by default, we already know who in the team are on a fast track growth process. Like we already know who probably is going to be promoted as a design manager or a lead designer or a senior designer come April. We already have a fair enough idea and we're already working with them on that. And come January, we'll start working on the team structures for next year. So we'll keep that in mind anyway. So-and-so person is anyway growing into a manager. We want this person to grow up the charter and lead these extra things also. So that way, everything kind of goes in tandem. How all of this has happened, to be honest, if you ask that question, I have no clue. At what point all of this happened? I'm glad that it all happened.
That was actually my next question, because before that you mentioned that you regret that it's not documented very well, and I'm like, this is sophisticated documentation, company-wide you're talking about. Because often what happens is it's easy to sit and get inspired by 10 other companies like Razorpay and document something. But does that work for you is a big challenge. Like we recently went through a pivot IndieFolio, and I'm sitting document and I'm like, we're changing the entire product every 6-7 months and the workflows. So it's a little irritating and it's useless and futile. Plus, obviously, our team is half of our entire design team. So we're a pretty small team. Also like growing rapidly. And sometimes there is no need. So what's the best time to do this, right? Is it that I'm wrong and no, you need to start with a framework and you should keep on iterating on it every 6 months? I'm not looking for a magic number, but when do you know that now is the time when you have to formalize this benchmarking and have a very clear roadmap for all careers and all roles and the metrics?
If I were to take two extremes, right? Like one, like where we were on day one, we more or less had this idea. Within a couple of months, we had it documented. On the other extreme, nothing is documented yet, but there is a understood idea, right? Having been on this side, I would root for this because this definitely worked out great for us. It was easier to go back and debate with another interviewer saying that this particular person fits the role because there was a competency framework. It was easier to go back and debate with the reviewer saying that so-and-so person has already reached the next level. We need to level that person up, right? These conversations become objective. They don't become subjective. So that entire subjectivity just goes out of the park the moment you have this documented. So having been here, I would definitely root for it. But again, defining them meticulously for, let's say, IndieFolio itself on day zero might not be super possible. So over there, organizations like Intercom, and if I remember correctly, even Google for that matter, or Facebook, they've open sourced all of their competency frameworks. And point is, a senior designer at so-and-so startup versus another senior designer at a similar startup at a similar growth phase, it's not going to be super different. There's a good overlap. So you can definitely pick those items and start off with a base for sure. And over time, you can iterate on it. We've done something similar. Early on, we got competency frameworks of a bunch of startups in the Indian ecosystem itself from close connects. We figured out how do we want to grow the team? What kind of levels do we want? What are the values that are important for designers that are already listed on the screen and which aren't listed on the screen, comparing all the competency frameworks. That gave us a good enough base and we started over that. But over time, we evolved and we have added a lot on top of that because, for example, last year we set up a content design team. I don't think there is a really available super big content design team available in India, especially in the startups that I know of. I could be wrong. So the first thing that we told one of the first content designers who joined us was to figure out top level values and the overall structure. And we kind of guided that person in making sure that she has some level of guidance and she has some base to kind of work on. Right? So that has become a practice now. Let's consider there is a new design role tomorrow, new design function altogether. Let's consider motion design for that matter, right? Like if we decide to kind of have that as a singular design function, one of the first things that we would do is go back and define that.
Brilliant. I think very few people do this. There's so much subjectivity generally, especially in what craft we are responsible for. These things really help. A lot of people, a lot of listeners, if you are in a company where you have a lot of counterparts to convince, a lot of leaders to convince to promote someone, to pat somebody on the back, or to make a hiring decision for your team, which needs to be signed off by someone, this is important. Coming to the last questions, Chetty. So, wanted to talk about design heads. I read something interesting by Alicjia Suska, an article on UX Collective, if I'm not wrong. What she had done is she had taken an interesting concept for exploring design debt. She took t-shirt sizes, small, medium, large, extra large, to measure the degree of design debt. Small being small, straightforward modifications to existing functionality, no research required. Medium being medium-sized projects usually involving one team, simple research, and it leverage an existing functionality or flow. There is the large initiatives that require cross-team collaboration, research, probably substantial changes in the flow or functionality. And then there is extra large, which is cross-departmental, cross-functional, cross-team that requires like a major architectural change, maybe broad ideation, complex research. It's probably like a potential redesign from its core. So the reason I unpacked this was to ask you, how do you deal with design debt? And for someone who maybe has not established design operations in the start, do you see that design debt becomes a bigger problem later on?
Oh, definitely. Not just design debt, any debt at a particular threshold is going to cause a lot of problems. Where you might face that building a new feature is a lot more difficult now, thanks to all the debt that you've kind of accrued, right? Like it's much easier to just sit and redo everything just to make sure that the new feature additions become a lot more faster and a lot more seamless, right? So there comes a point in every team where you start focusing a lot on debt. What we do on design is again a bunch of practices. I can highlight one of them, right? For example, I've already talked about how the sales conversations, the Excel sheets, right? So we actually we labeled that program. We labeled it as UX fails. Could be something as small as a particular animation not triggering at the right time, to something as huge as a statement being completely confusing for our customers, to something like the page never opened up itself, right? That's the even bigger problem, right? We had UX fails documented as a list. I call that design debt itself, because on a very utopian scenario, this should have never come across, right? What we used to do is we used to go back to the product managers as well as the engineers during the quarter planning session itself. For example, for Jan, Feb, and March, the quarter 4, the plan is already set in stone. Right from December 1st, we've already figured out what we need to do from Jan, Feb, and March. Designers used to go back to product managers and developers and figure out that, hey, you know what, we are already doing something on this particular KYC form. There are 3 UX fails that we've documented for the KYC form, which are, again, goes back to the t-shirt sizing itself, right? 3 small t-shirt sized tasks for design. You let me know on the dev side how many extra days you would need. And depending on that, we used to slyly put in a design debt, slyly push in a couple of tasks saying that, hey, this is something that we want to fix. So the moment I say the story out, an immediate question that genuinely comes to me is, how did you convince your PMs and devs to make sure that these things were happening? Because everyone has their own OKRs and all of it. Again, over there, when every design debt also had another column explaining clearly what the problems that the customer was facing, there was no need for us to convince someone as to why a particular sentence or why a particular animation needed edits. They were completely on board. And in fact, we had these recordings saved somewhere along with the UX debt fail, right? So UX fail, what is a probable solution? What's in it for the customer? Where do you see it happening? Or probably a screen recording or a customer support screenshot or whatever, right? So by default, everyone has access to that. Like basically we democratized user research. We made everyone a user researcher. Be it a software developer who just joined fresh out of college to a seasoned product manager who's been there, done that. We've transitioned everyone into a UX researcher overnight by giving them all this data. So rarely it happened that we had to go and convince. And this way, slowly, I saw that we were covering all the debt. But again, it's easier said than done. It's again a super fairy tale picture. There's always other priorities which kind of take over. That's where you do a conversation with the leader and you disagree and commit in a lot of situations. And for a lot of situations, you get convinced that, what, probably not worth going and solving this particular debt. We are okay living with it, right? So there are instances of this and that, but such tiny practices here and there which do not actually take up a lot of bandwidth, these things definitely help. But again, as I said, there's always debt, irrespective of how utopian you are and how ideal you are, there's always debt.
Fantastic. You covered some aspect of our last question. We have a tradition or a ritual of sorts for this podcast where the last question is always, what do you consider a design oops? Something which you often fail at and don't realize. If you can give me maybe one more example.
A little more relevant these days, the economy kind of seeing a roller coaster ride, right? A lot of startups and organizations overnight shutting off a particular product line or overnight down on one of the core products, which is natural, which is expected in this economy, right? You can't just be super experimental. For example, I don't expect Uber to double down on their investment of self-driving cars as of today.
Right.
Especially in this economy. So the age-old quote, build products that people want. Again, another quote from the founders of Y Combinator itself, right? Like a lot of times you would see that you over-design or you design and you solve something that probably doesn't need any solution in the first place, right? And in these times, it is even more important to make sure that people are chasing the right problem statements and organizations are also chasing the right markets and the right problem statements. Right? So I would call that a design oops moment where probably we need to sit and think if we are investing in the right problems or are there any problems that might not require an immediate solution? Can we not do them immediately? Can we put them aside for something even more critical?
Brilliant. I think I always tell a lot of founders that learn some aspects of design thinking or find somebody who does, because that's a big problem we solve, right? Because it's essentially something we're doing for humans. Yeah, I think a very common design oops, Chetty. This was lovely having you. I had a fantastic session. It's been over an hour. It did not feel like that to me. Any closing remarks?
Oh, I think this is a great forum to kind of speak. Rarely you get to go back and see, have we focused on design ops at all? Did it organically happen? What kind of frameworks did we have? I think a fantastic conversation that we've had. All I'd like to say is, I think the entire design industry is slowly evolving in India. 15 years ago, I don't think there was any function called design in India. There are definitely designers for sure, but I don't think we've seen founders or companies and leaders out there focusing a lot more on design. I'm glad that thing has changed. I'm glad that it is putting bread and butter on my plate. I have a job today thanks to the entire startup scene focusing a lot more on design. Looking forward to more things both on design as well as fintech in general. I think if you were to take fintech as a domain, the last 7 to 8 years has been an amazing ride with RBI, NPCI, and a bunch of entities kind of focusing a lot more. I don't think I should say it out even because we've seen something like a homegrown UPI being implemented as a pilot in countries like UK and a bunch of South American countries, right? That just basically shows how much we've grown in this domain and how much design has grown in this domain. Because we built a completely new way of people transacting, which is not just taking over the entire nation, but also we'll pretty soon see a lot of other countries kind of adopt it. Super thankful to be a part of it and super excited to see both design as a function as well as fintech as a domain. Like where is it headed? And I'm glad that I'm at the center of it.
I think you've done such satisfying work according to me, and there is so much which has happened in such a short period of time. And imagine what the next 10 years will be. So Thank you so much, Chetty. Once again, it was awesome to have you. And this will be the end of the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much.